Hi, it's Margaret, and thank you so much for joining me here on the Gardening Me. Today, I am going to do a little update on the perennial holding bed that I planted up about a month and a half ago. Things are going really good in that bed. The plants have grown quite a lot since I first put them in when most of them were like teeny tiny little things. So I thought it would be fun to just give a progress report on that. Now, I've also done a little bit more research on the varieties that I'm growing, and I'll tell you a little bit more about each one as I'm showing them to you. And sometimes, though, there were discrepancies, especially when it comes to zones and how cold hardy something is. So what I basically did is I used my best judgment. If I saw a hardiness rating across numerous sites, that's what I would use versus the one-off where there was one site where it said that it was a slightly different rating. Now, there are a lot of different varieties in this bed, 27 different varieties of stuff all told. So I can't keep all that straight in my head. So I do have my cheat sheet here that I'll be going off of as I go through each one. I really do love a good before and after. So what I am going to try to do is put up the footage of each of the different varieties I'm growing and what it looked like back in, I believe it was mid-May when I first put them in the ground compared to what it looks like now. So you can see how quickly it's growing. So here we are. And this is what the perennial bed looks like right now. And let me just flash back to what it looked like right after I planted it up in mid-May. It is quite a huge difference. So here I'm on the other side of the bed, and one of the things that sort of has surprised me quite a bit is how many of these perennials are actually blooming, because a lot of perennials will not bloom the first year when grown from seed, but there are quite a few bloomers in this bed, so that is really a pleasant surprise. We're going to start on this side right here. On the far right here are the salvias, so I'm just going to go one by one and talk a little bit about each different variety that I have in here. This one is called Sky Dance. It is part of the Ballet series, which was introduced by Gelato Seeds, and it has light blue flowers with dense flower heads, and it does rebloom if you deadhead. And this one gets 20 inches tall by 12 inches wide, and it is hardy from zones 3 to 8. Up here, we have Rose Rhapsody, which I also have down here. That's the little guy over there. So, Rose Rhapsody, as the name suggests, has soft pink flowers. And again, it is a rebloomer if you deadhead it. And this one gets 16 to 18 inches tall and 18 by 24 inches wide. And it's a zone 3 to 9. Now, look at this gloriousness back there. That is New Dimension Blue. Now, New Dimension Blue is a first-year flowering perennial, obviously, and it has violet blue flowers, and if you kind of look closely, the stems are a deep purple, especially around the top where the flower spikes are. It gets 12 inches tall and 18 inches wide, and it goes from zones 4 to 8, although I have seen a couple of sites indicate that it goes only from zones 5 to 8. After that, we have this little guy here, and you can see we have a bloom right there. And this one is Salvador Blue, and this one has deep violet purple spikes. This gets 10 to 12 inches tall and only 6 to 8 inches wide, and it goes from zones 4 to 8. Up here we have some Nepeta, which I'll get to in a minute, but just behind that we have New Dimension Rose, which is essentially like the New Dimension Blue, except it is pink. Behind it, with the huge leaves here, this is Blue Cloud, and this is a completely different species of Salvia. The species is Transylvanica, and this one has sky blue blooms, and it gets really big compared to the other ones. This one gets 2 to 3 feet tall and 1.5 to 2.5 feet wide. It is supposed to be first year flowering, but I don't see any flower spikes on that quite yet. And this one goes down from zones 4 to 7. But I have seen a couple of sites indicate that it goes all the way down to zone 3. So now we're going to come up here, and here we have some Nepeta, and this is actually just finished blooming. This one here is Blue Panther, and actually I think it's dark Blue Panther, and you can kind of just see the tail end here of the blooms. I mean, to me, that is much more purple than it is blue. Although these do have purplish cast, whereas the ones back here are decidedly more blue, so kind of a bluish purple on them. And this is a first year flowering perennial, and it grows 12 to 18 inches tall and about 12 to 24 inches wide. And it is a zone 4 to 8, although I have seen it listed all the way up to zone 9. Beside it is Pink Panther, and look at those pretty pink blooms. Oh, and here's a weed. Yeah, let's pull that out. Pink Panther is exactly the same as the Blue Panther, except with pink flowers. So same specs, zones 4 to 8, 12 to 18 inches tall, 12 to 24 inches wide. And this entire row here is Pink Panther all the way up to right there. All the way up there is a Rudbeckia. Actually, there are a couple of Rudbeckia up there, but I will do those when I do the Rudbeckia that are further down the bed. So next to the Pink Panther Nepeta, we have another Nepeta. This one is called Grandview, and the flowers are very similar to the Blue Panther, but apparently they come in all different shades of pinks, blues, and whites on the same plant. So far, I see mainly the blues, although on this one here, you can see some are quite a bit lighter than others. So Grandview grows 12 to 24 inches tall, so it's a little bit taller than the Panther series, and it's 12 to 18 inches wide. And I saw one person, though, comment that it can get up to 3 feet tall and wide. So we'll see if that's the case here. Back there, those plants right there, those are Penstemon. And this is Rocky Mountain Blue, which is an heirloom variety of Penstemon. And they have bright blue flowers, and the foliage turns from green to a reddish purple in the winter. It gets 24 to 30 inches tall and 36 inches wide. I mean, it's hard to believe. Right now, they're pretty small still. Only, I'd say 5 or 6 inches on the outside wide. Not even that tall. And since we're talking about Penstemon, I'm going to scooch over to this side of the bed and just talk a little bit about a couple of more varieties that I have. This one here is Dazzler Blend, and it is a dwarf compact Penstemon. It only gets about 12 inches tall, and it is almost that height right now. It is actually starting to flower. So this one gets to be, as I said, 12 inches tall, 8 to 12 inches wide, and it goes all the way down from zone 4 to zone 8. I have a whole row here of the Dazzler blend. Right beside here, I have Mystica. This one has soft lavender pink flowers, and the green foliage turns to shades of red and bronze in summer. You can already see that. And it turns brilliant red in the fall. This one gets to be 28 inches tall and 24 inches wide, and it goes all the way down to zone 3 up to zone 9. And again, I have a beautiful long row of this one all the way up here. For the last Penstemon, I'm actually on the other side of the bed, and it is right here. And these are actually not ones that I started from seed. What these are self-sown seedlings from my Dark Towers Penstemon that I already have in the garden. I found quite a few self-sown seedlings from that one in my garden bed. So what I did is a few I left in place and a couple I put into this garden bed, and I will be transplanting them into a different bed. Now, Dark Towers is a hybrid between Husker Red and Prairie Splendor. So chances are that these seedlings will not be true to type. They will not be Dark Towers, but it will be interesting to see how they turn out. The stats, though, on Dark Towers is that it is a big penstemon. It's 36 to 42 inches tall and 30 inches wide, and mine is more or less 4 feet tall and wide. It's pretty big. And the flowers are light pink, and it blooms in late spring, early summer, and then you get these beautiful dark seed pods afterwards. This one has gorgeous deep purple foliage throughout the season, and the basal rosette is more or less evergreen, even in my northern garden. And it's hardy from zones 3 to 8. So let's talk Rudbeckia. And I have quite a few Rudbeckia hirtas in here. Rudbeckia hirtas are really confusing, or at least I find them really confusing, because some are annuals, others are biennial, some are perennial, and oftentimes even different sites can't decide what's what. Now, this particular variety is one of those confusing ones where some sites list it as a perennial, other sites list it as an annual, and I even found one site that listed it as a biennial. So I'm thinking that perhaps it is a short-lived perennial, which means it's basically a perennial that only lasts 2 or 3 years, and then it kind of dwindles off. And the reason I say that is because if it was a biennial, these are first year blooming. So to me, that's not a biennial. I sowed these this year and they bloomed this year. So to me, that tells me at the very least, it's either a perennial or an annual. Now, I have other ones in my garden, though, that I planted last year and that did come back this year. And boy, they are making a glorious show. And in fact, let me just bring the camera over and I will show you what they look like. Now look at these. I mean, wow. This is absolutely gorgeous. It just covers the foliage. And I don't think there are that many plants in here. I'm thinking maybe 3 or 4 plants in here. It's gorgeous. Now, last year, though, I have to say that they really didn't amount to much because they were essentially overtaken by the poppies that were in this bed. And they kind of, went along throughout the summer. I think I got a few blooms, but they were quite short. And I just left everything in this bed as is just to see what would happen. And this is what I got. And boy, if these are perennial, oh, that would be amazing. I have several spots in the borders that could do with this gorgeous color. But look at that. Firstly, you have that beautiful green center, which is unusual for Rudbeckia. Then you have the deep orange in the center of the petals, and the tips of the petals are a much lighter yellow. Just beautiful. These are definitely a lot taller than the ones that are blooming in the other bed. I would say these are approaching 3 feet tall. And the ones in the other beds that are starting to flower are maybe 1.5 feet tall, 18 inches or so. Actually, now that I'm back here, I think they're a little bit taller than 18 inches. I would give them 2 feet tall. The specs, though, on them are that they get 2.5 to 3 feet tall, 1 to 2 feet wide, and they're hardy down to zones 5 all the way up to zone 8. Now, behind that, these Rudbeckia here, these have not flowered, and these guys here are actually Rudbeckia from saved seeds from one of my garden beds, and these are plants that were here when I first moved in, so I have no idea what kind of Rudbeckia they are. They've basically been in the same spot in my garden for about 12 years. They haven't spread at all. They self-seed a tiny little bit, but hardly at all. And that's about it. Now, back here, tucked away, is Indian summer Rudbeckia. And in fact, one of those is starting to bloom right here. The flowers themselves are extra large and they get 6 to 9 inches wide with golden yellow blooms. And they bloom from early summer to frost if you keep them deadheaded. This again is one that's listed as a biennial or short-lived perennial, but it self-sows and hopefully not rampantly. I did see one site that said that they can become invasive or at least aggressive, so I'll be watching out for that. This one is hardy from zones 3 to 7 and grows from 2 to 3 feet tall and 1 to 2 feet wide. I have a couple of different Rudbeckias that I kind of plopped into this area after I did the main transplanting of the perennials. And oh, I see a weedy grass bit here. I have 2 different varieties here. I did have a few more seedlings, but these are the only 2 that made it outdoors. This one here is Chimney. I've seen this one listed as both a perennial and an annual, and it has flowers that are absolutely gorgeous. The petals are very narrow and they're quilled, and they come in rusty shades of chocolate and bronze and red and gold. It gets to be 24 to 30 inches tall and about 12 inches wide, and it goes from zones 5 to 9. Now, beside that one is this. This one has a slightly different form here. I can already see there is a flower bud right there. This one is called Goldilocks, and I've seen this one listed as a perennial and a biennial. It has large double and semi-double flowers in a rich shade of golden yellow. It gets 20 to 24 inches tall and 12 to 18 inches wide, and it goes from zones 5 to 9. Next to the Rudbeckia, we have some Coreopsis, and the first one, this little guy here, is Double the Sun. And this one produces semi-double 2.5-inch flowers, and it blooms 2 to 3 weeks earlier than other Coreopsis, but it also finishes a couple of weeks earlier in the season as well. It's heat and drought tolerant once it's established, and it's a relatively small one at 12 to 15 inches tall and wide, and it goes from zones 4 to 9. Next to that one, right over here, this guy here, this is Sunburst, and this one has semi-double flowers as well, and these have dark yellow centers. This one blooms from summer to frost if deadheaded, and it is rated from zones 4 to 9, although in a couple of cases I have seen it where it's only rated down to zone 5. So I have quite a few of these all the way up to about here, and then as of there, this guy here and all the way up to the end is another variety of Coreopsis called Double Sunburst. That one blooms from summer to frost, and it has semi-double and double blooms, and it gets 18 to 24 inches tall, but only about 12 inches wide, and it is rated down from zone 4 to 9. And over here, I have another one that I actually forgot I had, and it's called Early Sunrise. I don't have any notes on that, but I will put on the screen the specs on that one. I'm assuming it's very similar to the other ones in terms of the hardiness, and it most likely has yellow flowers. From the name, I would assume it's probably an early bloomer. Behind that one is a sole threadleaf Coreopsis, and this one is called American Dream. It is the only Coreopsis, you can barely see it here, it's the only Coreopsis that actually has pink flowers. So unlike most other Coreopsis though, this one has very little drought tolerance, and it needs consistently moist soil in order to thrive, but it doesn't like poorly drained clay soil. So I'm thinking this is going to be a finicky one. It goes from zones 3 to 9. It does get 18 to 24 inches tall and 12 to 18 inches wide. I mean, right now it has a ways to go before it gets anywhere near that size. I have a feeling this one might end up staying in this bed until next year. Next up, we have Calamintha, and this is Marvelet White. And then back there, we have Marvelet Blue, which really should be called Marvelet Purple or Pink, I think. Obviously, this one is first year flowering, and it is so pretty. I am really, really enjoying it, even in this holding bed. It's drought tolerant once established. It gets about 10 to 12 inches tall and about 12 inches wide, and it goes down from zones 4 all the way up to zone 8. Here we have more Indian summer, just like the ones we had more in the middle of the bed. All of these seedlings here were actually seedlings that I got from winter sowing. And you can see, I mean, they're pretty small compared to the indoor sown ones. Like, for example, here are a couple of Rudbeckia from the seeds that I saved myself, and you can see how small they are compared to the ones that I sowed indoors. But of course, on the plus side, with winter sowing, there is no taking care of seedlings. You literally sow it, put it outside, and other than checking to make sure it stays relatively moist, the soil, and you vent it out if it gets a little bit too hot, there's really nothing to do. So what I did for these is in May sometime, I took them out of their little winter sowing container and I plopped them into this bed, and that was about it. So considering these were zero work, I'm pretty happy with that. I also have some echinacea here that also was winter sown, and we have a couple of different varieties. This one here is Mellow Yellows. Up here I have another Mellow Yellows, and I think this might be Paradiso Dwarf Mix. I'm not sure. I kind of got it mixed up. And the stats on that is for the Mellow Yellows, the blooms range from creamy to a golden yellow, and they get 24 to 30 inches tall, 12 to 24 inches wide, and they are a zone 4 to 8. And the Paradiso Dwarf is a little bit shorter at 12 to 24 inches tall, and it is a zone 4 to 8 as well. And it is a mix of colors of reds, yellows, whites, oranges, and pinks. And then last but not least were some Agastache. I did sow a bunch of different Agastache. Some of them are already planted up in the beds, even though they're still tiny, because I quite frankly didn't have the space in the raised beds to put them. But out of all of the Agastache I grew from seed, this variety here was actually the worst in terms of how the seedlings were before I transplanted them into the bed. So I thought they needed a little bit of coddling, and I decided to put them in the raised beds and not in the ornamental beds themselves. So this one is Golden Jubilee Agastache, and there are a few seedlings here, and they're starting to look pretty good. I mean, these looked really quite bad and very tiny when I first planted them in here. So I'm happy they survived, number one, and I'm quite satisfied with how big they're getting. These definitely need to be here at least another month or two. These will probably be one of the last things that I plant in the landscape later on this season. And that's basically about it. I am hoping to get some of these actually planted in the landscape sooner rather than later. But I do want to make sure I have everything in place before I do that, specifically the drip irrigation. I really don't want to put them in the ground and then get some really hot, dry spell and they end up suffering because I don't have the irrigation in place yet. So we'll see how that goes. But anyhow, I think that's it. So thank you so much for joining me today, and we will see you next time. Bye.